When 19-year-old Avalon Reeves walked into her dormitory at Thornfield University to find 3 Navy SEALs waiting in the lobby, she had no idea that her childhood hobby of building computers in her garage had caught the attention of the most secretive intelligence agencies in the world. What happened next would change not only her life, but the future of American national security. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the computer science building at Thornfield University, casting a pale glow across rows of workstations where students hunched over keyboards, their screens reflecting the concentrated effort of final projects. Room 247 buzzed with the familiar sounds of typing, mouse clicks, and the occasional frustrated sigh from someone debugging code that refused to cooperate. Avalon Reeves sat in the back corner, her auburn hair pulled into a messy bun secured with what appeared to be a repurposed Ethernet cable. While her classmates struggled with basic network security assignments, Avalon's fingers danced across her custom-built laptop with the fluid precision of a concert pianist. The laptop itself was a work of art, a sleek black chassis that she had designed and manufactured herself, running on processors that most students had never even heard of. "Miss Reeves," called Professor Jonathan Whitmore from the front of the classroom, his graying beard framing a face that had seen 30 years of teaching computer science at Thornfield. "Could you perhaps slow down a bit? You finished the penetration testing exercise in 12 minutes. The assignment was designed to take 2 hours. A few students turned to look at Avalon, some with admiration, others with barely concealed annoyance. This wasn't the first time she had completed assignments at a pace that made her professors question whether she was somehow cheating, though extensive monitoring had proven that her work was entirely legitimate. "Sorry, Professor Whitmore," Avalon replied, minimizing her screen. "I got carried away. The university's firewall has some interesting vulnerabilities that I thought you might want to know about." Professor Whitmore walked over to her workstation, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly quiet room. Other students had stopped their work to listen. Avalon's casual mentions of security vulnerabilities had become legendary among the computer science students, though few understood the full scope of what she was actually capable of. "What kind of vulnerabilities?" Professor Whitmore asked, though there was a hint of resignation in his voice. In the 2 years since Avalon had transferred to Thornfield from a small community college in rural Oregon, she had identified no fewer than 17 critical security flaws in the university systems. The IT department had gone from viewing her as a helpful student to treating her reports like emergency alerts. Avalon's screen displayed a complex network diagram that looked more like something from a government cybersecurity agency than a student project. "Well, the authentication system is using deprecated encryption protocols, and there's a buffer overflow vulnerability in the student portal that could give someone administrative access to the entire academic database. Also, the wireless network is broadcasting beacon frames that leak information about internal network topology." The classroom fell completely silent. Even students who didn't fully understand the technical terminology could sense that Avalon was describing problems far beyond their level of comprehension. Professor Whitmore studied the screen, his expression growing more concerned with each passing moment. "Miss Reeves, this level of analysis, where did you learn to do this?" Avalon shrugged, a gesture that had become her trademark response to questions about her abilities. "I've been building computers since I was 8. My dad worked in IT before he retired, and he taught me the basics. The rest I just picked up online." What Avalon didn't mention was that her picking up things online had included infiltrating cybersecurity forums used by government contractors, reverse engineering classified encryption algorithms, and developing her own penetration testing tools that were more sophisticated than anything available commercially. She also didn't mention that her modest family home in Millbrook, Oregon, contained a basement laboratory filled with servers and networking equipment that would have impressed engineers at major tech companies. Kendra Walsh, Avalon's roommate and closest friend at Thornfield, leaned over from the adjacent workstation. "Avenue, you're doing it again," she whispered. "Remember what we talked about? Try not to terrify the professors." Avalon smiled apologetically. Kendra, a psychology major with a minor in computer science, had become accustomed to her roommate's tendency to casually demonstrate capabilities that seemed almost superhuman. Over the past year, Kendra had watched Avalon help struggling students with programming assignments, fix the university's email server during a campus-wide outage, and once memorably, recover a professor's research data after a ransomware attack. "Miss Reeves," Professor Whitmore said, lowering his voice, "I think we need to have a conversation after class. This level of expertise, it's beyond anything I've seen in 20 years of teaching." As the class period ended and students began packing their belongings, Avalon felt the familiar mixture of pride and anxiety that came with standing out. She had always been different, always been able to see patterns and solve problems that others couldn't. But at Thornfield, surrounded by genuinely intelligent and motivated students, she had hoped to finally blend in. "Ave," Kendra said as they walked out of the computer science building. Professor Whitmore looked seriously freaked out. "What exactly did you show him?" Avalon adjusted her backpack, which contained not only textbooks, but also several pieces of custom hardware she had been working on. "Just some basic security analysis. I probably should have dumbed it down a bit. Basic security analysis," Kendra repeated with a laugh. Coming from someone who built her own quantum encryption device for fun last semester, they walked across the Thornfield University campus, passing groups of students enjoying the late afternoon sunshine. Thornfield was a small private university nestled in the mountains of Northern California, known for its rigorous academic programs and close-knit community. The campus was beautiful, with historic brick buildings surrounded by towering redwood trees and well-maintained gardens. Avalon had chosen Thornfield specifically because it was small enough that she could pursue her interests without drawing too much attention, but prestigious enough to provide access to advanced resources. What she hadn't anticipated was that even at a university known for brilliant students, her abilities would make her stand out like a beacon. "Have you given any more thought to graduate school?" Kendra asked as they approached their dormitory, Riverside Hall. "Professor Martinez in the electrical engineering department has been asking about you again. He thinks you should consider applying to MIT or Stanford." Avalon had been avoiding those conversations. The truth was that most graduate programs in computer science or electrical engineering would likely bore her. She had already mastered most of the theoretical foundations, and her practical skills exceeded those of many professors. What she really wanted was the freedom to pursue her own research without the constraints of academic bureaucracy. "I'm not sure traditional graduate school is the right path for me," Avalon replied as they entered the dormitory lobby. "I've been thinking about maybe starting my own company, or finding a research position at a tech company that would let me work on interesting problems." As they walked toward the elevator, Avalon noticed 3 men in dark suits standing near the reception desk. They were clearly not students. Their posture, their identical haircuts, and their obvious physical fitness marked them as military or law enforcement. One of them, a tall man with steel gray eyes, was speaking quietly with Rebecca Torres, the dormitory's resident advisor. "That's weird," Kendra muttered, following Avalon's gaze. "What do you think they want?" Before Avalon could respond, the tall man looked directly at her. "Miss Avalon Reeves?" Avalon felt her stomach drop. In her experience, when serious-looking men in suits knew your name, it was rarely good news. "Yes?" The man approached them, his companions flanking him with military precision. "Miss Reeves, my name is Commander Ryan Blackstone, United States Navy. We'd like to speak with you about an opportunity that might interest you." Kendra stepped closer to Avalon, her psychology training making her immediately suspicious of the situation. What kind of opportunity? Commander Blackstone's expression remained neutral, but Avalon caught the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested he wasn't accustomed to being questioned by college students. It's a matter that requires some privacy. Miss Reeves, would you be willing to speak with us in your room? Every instinct Avalon possessed told her that this moment was going to change everything. The careful balance she had maintained between hiding her abilities and pursuing her education was about to be disrupted. But as she looked at the three men, she realized that her secret had somehow ceased to be secret. How do you know who I am? She asked quietly. Commander Blackstone exchanged glances with his companions before answering. Miss Reeves, certain activities on various computer networks have attracted attention from people whose job it is to notice such things. We're here because we believe you possess skills that could be valuable to national security. Kendra grabbed Avalon's arm. Avenue, you don't have to talk to them without a lawyer present. But Avalon was already calculating possibilities. If the Navy had identified her, it meant they had been monitoring her activities for some time. It also meant that her attempts to keep a low profile had failed more completely than she had realized. What kind of skills are you talking about? Avalon asked. Commander Blackstone smiled for the first time since approaching them. The kind that most people consider impossible. Miss Reeves, we know about the work you've been doing in quantum cryptography. We know about your penetration testing capabilities. And we know about the algorithms you've developed that shouldn't exist outside of classified government research. Avalon felt the blood drain from her face. If they knew about her quantum encryption research, they had been watching her far more closely than she had imagined. That research was supposed to be entirely theoretical, conducted on isolated systems with no network connections. I think, Avalon said slowly, we should definitely have that conversation. What did you think the Navy discovered about Avalon's secret abilities? The truth behind her skills is more shocking than you can imagine. Hit that like button if you want to see how deep this mystery goes. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this. 1. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Avalon's dormitory room on the 3rd floor of Riverside Hall had never felt smaller than it did with 3 Navy personnel standing in it. Commander Blackstone and his 2 companions, who had introduced themselves simply as Lieutenant Hayes and Petty Officer Rodriguez, seemed to fill every available space with their military presence. Kendra sat on her bed, arms crossed, radiating protective energy. I'm staying, she had announced when the commander suggested she might want to give them privacy. Avalon's my roommate and my friend. Whatever you want to discuss with her, you can discuss with me here. Commander Blackstone had agreed with surprising grace, though Avalon noticed he positioned himself where he could see both the door and the window. Professional paranoia, she realized. These weren't just military recruiters. They were people accustomed to dealing with serious threats. Miss Reeves, Commander Blackstone began, settling into Avalon's desk chair. 3 weeks ago, someone using advanced quantum encryption protocols attempted to access a classified Department of Defense database. The attempt was unsuccessful, but the sophistication of the attack caught our attention. Avalon felt her mouth go dry. 3 weeks ago, she had been working on a theoretical project to test the vulnerabilities of quantum encrypted communications. She had designed what she thought was a harmless penetration test against a system she believed was academic in nature. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, though her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. Lieutenant Hayes, a woman with sharp features and calculating eyes, pulled out a tablet. Miss Reeves, we have digital forensics that trace the attack to hardware with a unique electromagnetic signature. Hardware that matches the specifications of the custom processors in your laptop. Avalon glanced at her laptop, sitting innocently on her desk next to a stack of computer science textbooks. The custom processors she had designed and built were supposed to be undetectable, using techniques that masked their electromagnetic emissions. If the military had identified them, their surveillance capabilities were far more advanced than she had imagined. Even if that were true, Kendra interjected, attempting to access a computer system isn't illegal if you don't actually gain access. And how do you know it wasn't just someone testing security? Commander Blackstone smiled grimly. Because the system in question was a classified military satellite communication network. And because the attack methodology demonstrated knowledge of quantum encryption protocols that are supposed to be known only to a handful of researchers with the highest levels of security clearance, Avalon's heart began racing. The system she had probed hadn't been labeled as military. It had appeared to be a research network at a technology company. If she had unknowingly attempted to breach military communications, the legal implications were staggering. I thought it was a corporate research network, she admitted quietly. I was working on a theoretical project about quantum encryption vulnerabilities. I never intended to access military systems. Petty Officer Rodriguez, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward. Miss Reeves, the corporate research network you accessed was actually a honeypot, a deliberately vulnerable system designed to attract and identify potential threats. What concerns us isn't that you found it. What concerns us is how quickly you penetrated 7 layers of security that were supposed to be impenetrable. Avalon felt the world tilting beneath her feet. A honeypot meant they had been actively monitoring her activities, analyzing her methods, studying her capabilities. This wasn't a chance discovery. It was the result of deliberate surveillance. How long have you been watching me? She asked. Commander Blackstone exchanged glances with his team before answering. Miss Reeves, your name first appeared on our radar 18 months ago when you published a paper on quantum error correction in an obscure academic journal. The paper contained insights that our best researchers had been struggling with for years. Avalon remembered that paper, her sophomore year independent study project that Professor Whitmore had encouraged her to publish. She had thought it was relatively basic work, an exploration of mathematical principles that seemed obvious to her. That paper, Lieutenant Hayes continued, contained solutions to problems that are actively being researched by classified government programs. Solutions that shouldn't be possible without access to experimental data that you couldn't possibly have. Kendra stood up abruptly. Wait, are you accusing Avalon of espionage? Because that's insane. She's a 19-year-old college student from Oregon. We're not accusing her of anything, Commander Blackstone said calmly. We're trying to understand how a 19-year-old college student from Oregon has independently developed capabilities that rival our most advanced research teams. Avalon's mind raced through the implications. If the military had been monitoring her for 18 months, they had seen far more than just her academic work. They had seen her private research, her experimental projects, her attempts to push the boundaries of what was theoretically possible. What exactly do you know about my work? She asked. Petty Officer Rodriguez consulted his tablet. We know about your quantum encryption research. We know about the custom hardware you've developed. We know about your penetration testing tools that use novel attack vectors. And we know about the artificial intelligence algorithms you've been developing in your spare time. Avalon's blood ran cold. Her AI research was supposed to be completely private, conducted on isolated systems with no network connections. If they knew about that work, they had either been conducting physical surveillance or had access to information that should have been impossible to obtain. How do you know about the AI research? Commander Blackstone's expression grew more serious. Miss Reeves, 3 months ago, power consumption at your family's home in Millbrook increased by 340%. The electrical usage pattern was consistent with high-performance computing operations. When we investigated, we discovered that your basement laboratory was drawing power at levels typically associated With small data centers, Avalon felt a wave of panic. They had been investigating her family, monitoring her home, analyzing her personal activities. The scope of their surveillance was far beyond anything she had imagined possible. "This is harassment," Kendra said angrily. "You're talking about spying on an American citizen without a warrant." "Actually," Lieutenant Hayes replied, "when potential threats to national security are identified, certain investigative measures are permitted under the Patriot Act and subsequent legislation." Miss Reeves' activities triggered multiple automated monitoring systems. Avalon realized that her attempts to keep a low profile had failed completely. Every precaution she had taken, every security measure she had implemented, had been inadequate against the surveillance capabilities of the U.S. military. "What do you want from me?" she asked directly. Commander Blackstone leaned forward. "Miss Reeves, we want to offer you an opportunity to use your abilities in service of your country. The Department of Defense has need for someone with your unique skill set." "What kind of opportunity?" "A chance to work on projects that would challenge you intellectually while contributing to national security. Research that would make your current work look elementary by comparison." Avalon felt torn between curiosity and fear. The promise of truly challenging work was tempting, but the military's knowledge of her private life was deeply unsettling. "And if I'm not interested?" The room fell silent. Commander Blackstone's expression remained neutral, but Avalon caught the subtle shift in posture from his companions. "Miss Reeves," Commander Blackstone said carefully, "your capabilities represent either a significant asset or a significant risk to national security. We would prefer that you choose to be an asset." The implicit threat was clear. Avalon looked at Kendra, whose face had gone pale with understanding. "Are you saying I don't really have a choice?" "Everyone has choices, Miss Reeves. But some choices have consequences that are easier to live with than others." Avalon felt the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. Her quiet life as a college student, her dreams of gradual recognition for her work, her hope of maintaining some level of privacy, all of it was ending. "I need time to think about this." Commander Blackstone nodded. "Of course. We'll be in town for the next 48 hours. But Miss Reeves, I should mention that your professor, Dr. Whitmore, contacted the university administration about your security analysis today. The administration contacted the FBI. The FBI contacted us. Your window for maintaining anonymity is closing rapidly." As the three military personnel prepared to leave, Commander Blackstone handed Avalon a business card with only a phone number printed on it. "When you're ready to discuss this further, call that number. And Miss Reeves, I'd recommend being very careful about your online activities until we speak again. There are other people who might be interested in your capabilities, and not all of them have America's best interests at heart." After they left, Avalon and Kendra sat in stunned silence for several minutes. "Avenue," Kendra finally said, "what the hell have you been doing in that basement laboratory?" Avalon looked at the business card in her hand, realizing that her secret world was about to become very public indeed. "What do you think Avalon has been hiding in her basement laboratory?" "The truth about her research is more dangerous than anyone imagined." Share your theories in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to see what happens when the Pentagon discovers the full extent of her abilities. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching Avalon's mood as she sat in the campus coffee shop, staring at Commander Blackstone's business card. She had barely slept, her mind racing through the implications of everything the Navy team had revealed. Kendra sat across from her, nursing a large cappuccino and watching her roommate with growing concern. "You look terrible," Kendra observed, not unkindly. "Did you get any sleep at all?" Avalon shook her head, pushing her untouched breakfast around her plate. "I kept thinking about what they said. About other people being interested in my capabilities. What if they're not the only ones watching me? Avenue, you're spiraling. Let's focus on what we know for sure." Kendra pulled out a notebook where she had been organizing her thoughts. They want to recruit you for some kind of military research position. They've been monitoring you for 18 months, and they're giving you 48 hours to decide. It's not really a decision though, is it? Avalon said bitterly. They made it pretty clear that refusing isn't actually an option. Before Kendra could respond, Avalon's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Miss Reeves, please report to Dean Patterson's office at 10 a.m. This concerns your academic future at Thornfield. Administrative assistant. Avalon showed Kendra the message, feeling her stomach drop. They're not wasting any time. An hour later, Avalon sat in the plush waiting area outside Dean Patterson's office in the Thornfield Administration Building. The building was one of the oldest on campus, with dark wood paneling and oil paintings of former university presidents lining the walls. Normally, the traditional atmosphere was comforting, but today it felt oppressive. Miss Reeves? A stern-looking woman in her 50s emerged from the inner office. Dean Patterson will see you now. Dean Catherine Patterson was a formidable woman who had been leading Thornfield University for nearly 15 years. Her office reflected her personality, organized, elegant, and intimidating. Behind her desk hung her various degrees and awards, including recognition from the Department of Education and several technology companies. Avalon, please sit down. Dean Patterson's tone was formal but not unkind. We need to discuss some concerns that have been raised about your activities here at Thornfield. Avalon settled into the leather chair across from the dean's desk, trying to project calm despite her racing heart. What kind of concerns? Yesterday, Professor Whitmore contacted me about your analysis of the university's computer systems. He was quite disturbed by what you showed him. Dean Patterson pulled out a thick folder. This morning, I received a visit from FBI agents who informed me that you are under investigation for potential violations of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. The room seemed to spin slightly. The FBI had moved faster than Avalon had anticipated. Dean Patterson, I never intended to break any laws. Everything I did was for educational purposes. The FBI agents also mentioned that you've attracted the attention of certain defense contractors who are very interested in recruiting you. Dean Patterson leaned forward. Avalon, I've been in higher education for 25 years, and I've never seen anything quite like this situation. Avalon realized that Dean Patterson was walking a careful line between protecting the university and protecting her student. What does this mean for my enrollment here? That depends entirely on how you handle the next few hours. Dean Patterson opened the folder, revealing what appeared to be legal documents. The university has received a formal request from the Department of Defense to suspend your enrollment and release your academic records to federal investigators. Avalon felt like she was drowning. Can they do that? Under certain circumstances, yes. However, the university also has obligations to protect our students' privacy and academic freedom. Dean Patterson pulled out another document. I've been contacted by a representative from Meridian Defense Systems, a major defense contractor. They're offering you a full scholarship, immediate enrollment in their graduate research program, and a substantial signing bonus. What's the catch? You would need to withdraw from Thornfield immediately and relocate to their facility in Virginia. Your research would be classified, and you would be required to sign extensive non-disclosure agreements. Avalon stared at the documents, realizing that her choice was being systematically eliminated. And if I refuse? Dean Patterson's expression grew more serious. The FBI agents were quite clear that they consider you a person of interest in an ongoing investigation. They suggested that cooperation would be viewed favorably, while continued resistance might result in criminal charges. So my choices are join the military, work for a defense contractor, or go to prison. I'm afraid the situation has moved beyond normal academic concerns. Dean Patterson stood and walked to her window, which overlooked the peaceful campus quad. Avalon, in my professional opinion, You've developed capabilities that have made it impossible for you to remain a normal college student. Avalon felt anger building alongside her fear. I never asked for any of this. I just wanted to study computer science and maybe do some interesting research. Sometimes, extraordinary abilities come with extraordinary responsibilities. Dean Patterson returned to her desk. The question is whether you're going to take control of your situation or let others control it for you. A knock on the office door interrupted their conversation. Dean Patterson's assistant entered, looking flustered. Dean Patterson, there are 3 men here who say they need to speak with Miss Reeves immediately. They have federal identification. Through the office window, Avalon could see Commander Blackstone and his team waiting in the outer office. Their presence felt like a trap closing around her. Dean Patterson, Avalon said quietly, what would happen if I just refused everything? What if I told the military, the FBI, and the defense contractors that I'm not interested in any of their offers? Dean Patterson studied her carefully. Are you prepared for the consequences of that choice? I don't know. But I'm tired of being treated like I don't have any say in my own life. Dean Patterson nodded slowly. Then let's find out what your options really are. She pressed her intercom button. Please send the federal agents in. Commander Blackstone entered with Lieutenant Hayes and Petty Officer Rodriguez, their military bearing even more pronounced in the formal academic setting. Behind them came 2 people Avalon didn't recognize, a woman in an expensive business suit and a man who radiated the same professional intensity as the Navy team. Miss Reeves, Commander Blackstone said, I'd like you to meet Dr. Amanda Foster from Meridian Defense Systems and Agent Michael Torres from the FBI's Cybercrime Division. Dr. Foster stepped forward with a practiced smile. Miss Reeves, I've been following your work for some time. Meridian would like to offer you an extraordinary opportunity to develop your abilities in a supportive, well-funded environment. Agent Torres was more direct. Miss Reeves, we need to discuss your unauthorized access to federal computer systems. There are serious charges pending, but cooperation could lead to a more favorable outcome. Avalon felt surrounded by people who viewed her as either an asset to be acquired or a threat to be neutralized. The small office suddenly felt claustrophobic with 6 adults all focused on her decision. I need everyone to stop talking for a moment, Avalon said, standing up. The room fell silent. You're all treating me like I'm some kind of weapon that needs to be controlled or pointed in the right direction. But I'm a 19-year-old student who just wants to learn and create things. Dr. Foster's smile became more strained. Miss Reeves, surely you understand that your capabilities come with certain responsibilities. No, Avalon interrupted. I understand that you all want to use my capabilities for your own purposes. But what if I don't want to be used? Agent Torres stepped forward. Miss Reeves, this isn't really about what you want. Your activities have national security implications. Because I wrote a paper about quantum encryption. Because I built my own computers. Because I'm good at solving problems. Avalon's voice rose with frustration. When did being smart become a crime? Commander Blackstone tried a different approach. Avalon, we're not trying to punish you. We're trying to give you opportunities that match your abilities. Opportunities that happen to serve your needs perfectly. Avalon looked around the room at the faces watching her. What if I told you that I never want to work on military applications? What if I said I want to use my abilities for purely civilian research? The silence that followed was telling. Dr. Foster exchanged glances with Agent Torres. Commander Blackstone's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Miss Reeves, Agent Torres said carefully, given the nature of your capabilities and the current security environment, purely civilian research might not be possible. Why not? Because, Dr. Foster said, the technologies you've been developing have inherent dual-use applications. Quantum encryption, advanced AI, penetration testing tools. These all have military significance whether you intend it or not. Avalon, realized they were telling her that her intelligence itself was considered a national security asset. So because I'm good at computer science, I don't get to choose how to use my abilities? You get to choose, Commander Blackstone said. But your choices are necessarily limited by the reality of the situation. Dean Patterson, who had been quietly observing the exchange, finally spoke. Gentlemen, Dr. Foster, I think you're missing something important. Miss Reeves is an American citizen with constitutional rights. She cannot be compelled to work for the government against her will. Agent Torres turned to the dean. With respect, Dean Patterson, Miss Reeves' activities have already placed her in legal jeopardy. Cooperation would be in her best interest. Avalon felt a surge of defiance. What if I refuse to cooperate with any of you? The question hung in the air like a challenge. She could see the calculations behind their eyes, the mental chess moves as they considered their options and her potential responses. Miss Reeves, Dr. Foster said with forced patience, you're being offered opportunities that most people could only dream of. Why would you want to refuse? Because, Avalon said, meeting each of their gazes in turn, I want to make my own choices about my life and my work. I want to use my abilities to help people, not to build better weapons or surveillance systems. Commander Blackstone leaned forward. And what if the people you want to help are Americans whose security depends on advanced defense technologies? Then I'll find ways to help them that don't require me to surrender my freedom. The room fell silent again. Avalon could feel the weight of their collective pressure, but she also felt something else, a clarity that came from finally articulating what she actually wanted. I respectfully decline all of your offers, she said clearly. I want to finish my education here at Thornfield, pursue my research interests through normal academic channels, and make my own decisions about my future career. Agent Torres stood up abruptly. Miss Reeves, I don't think you understand the serious legal consequences of that decision. Then maybe you should explain them to my lawyer. Avalon replied, pulling out her phone. Because I think it's time I got some independent legal advice about my rights and options. The federal agents exchanged looks that suggested this conversation had not gone according to their plan. Dr. Foster's corporate smile finally disappeared. Entirely. Commander Blackstone was the last to speak. Miss Reeves, I hope you'll reconsider. There are aspects to this situation that you don't fully understand yet. Then maybe it's time someone explained them honestly instead of trying to manipulate me into compliance. As the federal agents and Dr. Foster filed out of Dean Patterson's office, Avalon felt simultaneously liberated and terrified. She had just refused the U.S. military, the FBI, and a major defense contractor. Whatever happened next, there would be no going back to her quiet life as an anonymous college student. Did Avalon make the right choice by refusing the government's offers? The consequences of her decision will be more dangerous than she could have imagined. Let me know what you think she should have done in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to see how the government responds to her defiance. 3 hours after her confrontation in Dean Patterson's office, Avalon sat in the law library at Thornfield, surrounded by legal databases and constitutional law textbooks. Her phone had been buzzing constantly with calls from unknown numbers, which she had been steadfastly ignoring. Kendra sat beside her, taking notes as they researched federal surveillance laws and student rights. Okay, so according to this, Kendra said, highlighting a passage in a constitutional law textbook, the government can't compel you to work for them just because you're smart. That would violate the 13th Amendment's prohibition on involuntary servitude. Avalon looked up from her laptop, where she had been researching cases involving computer crimes and national security. But they can prosecute me for accessing those systems, even if I didn't know they were classified. The Computer Fraud and Abuse Act is pretty broad. Kendra agreed, but intent matters. If you can prove you thought you were accessing a legitimate research system, That's the problem. Avalon interrupted. They're claiming I should have known it was a government honeypot because of the sophistication of the security. They're basically saying that being too good at what I do makes me guilty. Avalon's laptop chimed with an encrypted message notification. She had set up several secure communication channels after realizing the extent of the surveillance she was under. The message was from an anonymous sender using a routing system that bounced through multiple international servers. Miss Reeves, you are not the only student being targeted. Meet us in the basement of the Whitmore Library tonight at 11 p.m. Come alone. We have information about the real scope of what's happening. Friends, Avalon showed the message to Kendra, who immediately shook her head. Absolutely not. That's obviously a trap. Maybe, Avalon said. But what if it's not? What if there really are other students in similar situations? Before Kendra could respond, Professor Whitmore appeared at their table. His usually composed demeanor seemed shaken, and he was carrying a thick manila envelope. Avalon, I need to speak with you privately, he said, glancing around the library nervously. It's about what happened yesterday. They moved to a private study room, where Professor Whitmore sealed the door and activated a white noise generator, standard equipment in rooms, designed for sensitive discussions. Avalon, I made a serious mistake yesterday when I reported your security analysis to the administration, he began. I had no idea it would trigger this kind of response. Professor, it's not your fault. I should have been more careful about demonstrating my capabilities. That's just it, Professor Whitmore said, opening the envelope. After you left my class yesterday, I did some research into the systems you analyzed. The vulnerabilities you identified weren't just university security flaws. You had somehow mapped network connections that extend far beyond Thornfield's infrastructure. He pulled out a series of network diagrams that looked far more complex than anything Avalon remembered creating. These diagrams show connections to defense contractors, government research facilities, and classified military networks. Avalon, somehow your analysis had penetrated systems that shouldn't even be accessible from the university network. Avalon studied the diagrams with growing alarm. Professor, I never created these diagrams. My analysis was limited to Thornfield's internal systems. That's what I thought initially. But then I realized something disturbing. Professor Whitmore pulled out another document. The timestamp on these files shows they were created while you were working on the assignment, but the complexity and scope are far beyond what you were attempting. Avalon felt a chill run down her spine. Are you saying someone else was using my access to explore these systems? I'm saying that either your capabilities are far more extensive than you realize, or someone has been using your network activity as cover for their own operations. Kendra, who had been quietly listening, leaned forward. Professor Whitmore, are you suggesting that Avalon is being framed? I'm suggesting that the situation is more complex than anyone initially. Understood. Professor Whitmore pulled out a final document. This morning, I received a visit from Dr. Harrison Webb, the director of Thornfield's Computer Science Research Consortium. He informed me that the university has been selected to participate in a classified government research program. What kind of program? Avalon asked. A program designed to identify and recruit students with exceptional capabilities in cybersecurity and advanced computing. According to Dr. Webb, Thornfield is one of 12 universities participating in this program. Avalon realized that her situation might not be unique. Professor, are you saying there are other students like me? I'm saying that your identification by the government may not have been accidental. The university has been systematically evaluating students and reporting exceptional capabilities to federal agencies. The implications hit Avalon like a physical blow. Thornfield University, the institution she had trusted to protect her academic freedom, had been actively monitoring and reporting on its students. Did you know about this program? Kendra asked Professor Whitmore. I was informed about it this morning after yesterday's events. Faculty members are required to report any student activities that demonstrate unusual capabilities. Professor Whitmore looked genuinely distressed. Avalon, I never intended for my report to trigger a federal investigation. But it did, Avalon said quietly. And now I need to know how many other students are in similar situations. Professor Whitmore hesitated before responding. According to Dr. Webb, 17 students at Thornfield have been flagged for federal attention over the past 2 years. Most have accepted government or defense contractor positions after graduation. What happened to the ones who didn't accept? I don't know. Dr. Webb said their cases were handled by federal agencies directly. Avalon's phone vibrated with another encrypted message. Miss Reeves, Professor Whitmore's office is under surveillance. Leave the library immediately and meet us at the coffee shop on Maple Street. You are in immediate danger. Friends, Avalon showed the message to Professor Whitmore and Kendra. Professor Whitmore's face went pale. If they're monitoring my communications, then this conversation has already been compromised, he said. Avalon, you need to be extremely careful about who you trust. As they prepared to leave the study room, Avalon noticed something that made her blood run cold. Through the window, she could see several black SUVs parked around the library, and figures in dark clothing positioned at various exits. Professor, she whispered, I think we're already surrounded. Professor Whitmore looked out the window and cursed quietly. There's a service exit in the basement that connects to the steam tunnels. If you're willing to trust me one more time, I can get you out of here. As they moved through the library's back corridors, Avalon's mind raced through the implications of everything she had learned. The government's interest in her wasn't accidental. It was part of a systematic program to identify and control students with exceptional abilities. Thornfield University was complicit in this program, actively monitoring and reporting on its students. The basement of the library was a maze of storage rooms and mechanical equipment. Professor Whitmore led them to a heavy steel door marked, Authorized Personnel Only. This connects to the university's utility tunnel system, he explained, producing a key card. The tunnels run under most of the campus and connect to several off-campus locations. As they entered the dimly lit tunnel, Avalon realized she was making a choice that would fundamentally change her relationship with the university and possibly with society itself. She was going underground, literally and figuratively. Professor, she said as they walked through the tunnel, who were the anonymous people who sent me those messages? I suspect there are other students who have been through similar experiences. There are rumors about an informal network of people who help students escape federal recruitment programs. Escape? You make it sound like prison. From what I've heard, the distinction isn't always clear. The tunnel emerged in the basement of a building several blocks from campus. Professor Whitmore led them up a service stairway to a door that opened onto a quiet residential street. The coffee shop on Maple Street is 3 blocks north, he said. Avalon, I want you to know that whatever happens next, you have allies who believe in your right to make your own choices. As Avalon and Kendra walked through the darkened streets toward their mysterious meeting, Avalon reflected on how completely her life had changed in just 48 hours. She had gone from being an anonymous college student to being the target of a federal recruitment program that apparently operated at universities across the country. The coffee shop on Maple Street was a small, independently owned establishment that stayed open late to serve the university community. When Avalon and Kendra arrived, they found it nearly empty except for a young woman sitting alone in a corner booth, a laptop open in front of her. The woman looked up as they approached, and Avalon was struck by the intelligence and caution in her eyes. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with short black hair and the kind of intense focus that Avalon recognized in herself. Avalon Reeves? The woman asked quietly. Yes. Are you the person who sent me those messages? I'm Rachel Kim. I graduated from MIT 2 years ago. And yes, I'm part of a network that helps students like you understand what you're really facing. Rachel gestured for them to sit down, then activated a small device that Avalon recognized as a signal jammer. "We have about 20 minutes before they track this location. That should be enough time to explain what's really happening." Rachel opened her laptop, revealing a sophisticated tracking interface that showed multiple moving dots on a map of the university area. Each of these dots represents a federal surveillance team. "They've been tracking you for months, but the activity has intensified dramatically since yesterday." "How do you know all this?" Kendra asked. "Because I went through exactly what Avalon is experiencing now. Exceptional performance in computer science, identification by federal agencies, pressure to join government programs." Rachel's expression darkened. "The difference is that I made the mistake of accepting their offer initially." "What happened?" "I spent 8 months working on classified projects that I gradually realized were being used for domestic surveillance and political manipulation. When I tried to leave, I discovered that my employment contract included clauses that essentially made me government property." Avalon felt sick. "How did you get out?" "With help from other people who had escaped similar situations. There's an underground network of scientists, engineers, and researchers who help people like us maintain our independence." Rachel pulled up another screen, showing profiles of dozens of students. "Avalon, you're part of a systematic program to identify and control individuals with exceptional technological capabilities. The program operates at universities nationwide, and most students never realize they're being evaluated until it's too late. What's the ultimate goal? Complete control over advanced research and development in the United States. By identifying and recruiting the most capable individuals before they can establish independent careers, the government ensures that all cutting-edge technology development happens under federal oversight." As Rachel explained the scope of the program, Avalon realized that her refusal to cooperate hadn't just endangered her own freedom. It had challenged a system designed to control the most intelligent and capable people in the country. "Rachel," Avalon said, "what happens to people who refuse to cooperate?" Rachel's expression grew grim. "That depends on how valuable the government considers their capabilities. Some people are allowed to pursue limited civilian careers under constant surveillance. Others face legal harassment until they agree to cooperate. And a few simply disappear into the classified world and are never heard from." Again, the signal jammer on Rachel's device began beeping, indicating that their electronic privacy was about to be compromised. "We need to move," Rachel said, closing her laptop. "Avalon, you have a choice to make. You can try to fight this system on your own and likely lose, or you can join our network and learn how to protect yourself and others." As they prepared to leave the coffee shop, Avalon realized that she was about to cross another threshold. Her decision to refuse government recruitment had led her to discover an underground resistance movement that she never could have imagined existed. What do you think Avalon should do? Join the underground network or try to fight the system alone? The next decision will determine whether she can maintain her freedom or becomes another casualty of government control. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to see what choice she makes. Rachel led Avalon and Kendra through a series of back alleys and residential streets, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent years evading surveillance. They eventually arrived at a nondescript apartment building on the outskirts of town, where Rachel used multiple keys and electronic devices to bypass several layers of security. "Welcome to one of our safe houses," Rachel said as they climbed to the 3rd floor. "It's not much, but it's clean and completely off the grid." The apartment was sparse but functional, with multiple computer workstations, communication equipment, and what appeared to be a sophisticated electronics laboratory. Maps and diagrams covered one wall, connected by colored strings that traced relationships between various institutions and government agencies. "This is incredible," Avalon said, studying the wall display. "How long have you been tracking all this?" "The network has been documenting this program for over 5 years," Rachel replied. activating several computer systems. What we've discovered is far worse than individual recruitment cases. The government has created a systematic pipeline to identify, monitor, and ultimately control every person in America with exceptional technical capabilities. Kendra examined a chart showing universities across the country. How many schools are involved? 47 universities and colleges that we've identified so far. Each one has faculty members who are required to report on exceptional students. The reports go to something called the National Talent Assessment Program, which is jointly operated by the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, and the NSA. Rachel pulled up a database on one of the computer screens. Avalon, this is what we know about students who have been targeted by the program over the past 5 years. The database contained hundreds of entries, each representing a student with exceptional abilities who had been identified and approached by federal agencies. Avalon scrolled through the entries, noting the diversity of specializations: computer science, mathematics, physics, engineering, chemistry, and even some unexpected fields like linguistics and psychology. What happened to all these people? Avalon asked. About 60% accepted government or defense contractor positions. 20% are currently in graduate programs that are secretly funded by federal agencies. 15% are working in private industry under constant surveillance. And 5% ... double quotes. Rachel paused. 5% have disappeared entirely from public records. Avalon felt sick as she realized the scope of what they were dealing with. Rachel, you're talking about hundreds of people whose lives have been fundamentally altered by this program. Actually, we think it's thousands. This database only includes cases we've been able to document. The program has been operating for at least a decade, possibly longer. A new voice came from the apartment's back room. It's been operating since 1995, actually. A man in his 30s emerged, carrying a laptop and wearing the kind of thick glasses that suggested years of intensive computer work. Sorry, I was monitoring communications traffic. I'm David Park, and I've been researching the historical origins of this program. David connected his laptop to the main display system. The National Talent Assessment Program grew out of concerns after the end of the Cold War about maintaining American technological superiority. The idea was to identify and cultivate the next generation of scientists and engineers who could develop advanced defense technologies. That doesn't sound inherently evil. Kendra observed. It wasn't. Initially, David agreed. But after September 11th, the program was expanded dramatically under the Patriot Act. The focus shifted from cultivation to control. The government decided that exceptional technological capabilities represented potential security risks that needed to be managed. Rachel pulled up another screen showing budget allocations. The program now receives over $2 billion in annual funding. It employs thousands of people across multiple agencies, and it has successfully identified and processed over 10,000 individuals since 2001. Avalon stared at the numbers in disbelief. 10,000 people? Think about it, David said. Every generation produces a certain number of individuals with truly exceptional capabilities. In previous eras, these people became independent inventors, entrepreneurs, or academic researchers. They drove innovation through their own creativity and initiative. But now, Rachel continued, the government identifies these individuals early and either recruits them into federal programs or monitors them so closely that independent innovation becomes impossible. Avalon realized the implications extended far beyond individual freedom. You're saying this program is actually suppressing technological innovation in America? Exactly. By controlling the most capable individuals, the government has created a bottleneck that slows down overall technological progress. Innovation is limited to what federal agencies consider safe or useful. David pulled up a comparison chart. Look at the rate of breakthrough innovations in computing. materials science, and biotechnology before and after the program's expansion. There's a clear decline in revolutionary developments that originate outside of government-funded research, but surely some innovations still come from private companies, Kendra said. They do. But most major tech companies now have extensive contracts with federal agencies. Their research priorities are heavily influenced by government interests. Rachel pointed to a network diagram showing connections between tech companies and federal agencies. Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, they all participate in classified research programs that give the government significant influence over their innovation directions. Avalon studied the network diagram, noting the complex web of relationships between companies, universities, and government agencies. So the program doesn't just control individuals, it controls entire sectors of the economy. The goal is technological hegemony, David explained. Complete control over the development and deployment of advanced technologies. The government believes this is necessary for national security, but the side effects are profound. Rachel activated another display showing global innovation metrics. Countries like South Korea, Singapore, and Israel are beginning to out-innovate the United States in certain areas, specifically because they allow more independent research and development. What about other students who have tried to resist? Avalon asked. Have any of them been successful? Rachel and David exchanged glances before Rachel answered. A few have managed to maintain their independence, but at significant cost. They typically have to relocate outside the United States, give up American citizenship, and permanently sever ties with family and friends. That's essentially exile, Kendra said. It is. And even then, some of them have faced harassment or worse in their new countries. The reach of American intelligence agencies is extensive. David pulled up profiles of several individuals. These are people who successfully escaped the program and are now living abroad. They're doing innovative work, but they can never return to the United States. Avalon recognized some of the names from academic papers she had read. Brilliant researchers who had seemingly disappeared from American institutions and reappeared at foreign universities. She had assumed they were simply pursuing better opportunities abroad. How many people are actively working to resist this program? Avalon asked. Our network includes about 300 people in the United States and maybe another 100 abroad, Rachel replied. But we have to be extremely careful about security. The government has infiltrated several resistance groups over the years. What happened to those groups? The members were arrested on various charges: tax evasion, computer crimes, terrorist connections. The charges never quite stick, but the legal process is expensive and time-consuming enough to effectively neutralize people. David. Rachel and David exchanged glances before Rachel answered. A few have managed to maintain their independence, but at significant cost. They typically have to relocate outside the United States, give up American citizenship, and permanently sever ties with family and friends. That's essentially exile, Kendra said. It is. And even then, some of them have faced harassment or worse in their new countries. The reach of American intelligence agencies is extensive. David pulled up profiles of several individuals. These are people who successfully escaped the program and are now living abroad. They're doing innovative work, but they can never return to the United States. Avalon recognized some of the names from academic papers she had read. Brilliant researchers who had seemingly disappeared from American institutions and reappeared at foreign universities. She had assumed they were simply pursuing better opportunities abroad. How many people are actively working to resist this program? Avalon asked. Our network includes about 300 people in the United States and maybe another 100 abroad, Rachel replied. But we have to be extremely careful about security. The government has infiltrated several resistance groups over the years. What happened to those groups? The members were arrested on various charges: tax evasion, computer crimes, terrorist connections. The charges never quite stick, But the legal process is expensive and time-consuming enough to effectively neutralize people. David showed her a map with red dots marking locations where resistance members had been arrested. The pattern suggests systematic surveillance and targeted prosecution of people who help others escape government recruitment. Avalon realized that by refusing to cooperate with the federal agencies, she had essentially declared war against a system with virtually unlimited resources and legal authority. So what are my realistic options? You can try to disappear within the United States, but that's extremely difficult and dangerous, Rachel said. You can accept exile and try to build a life abroad. Or you can join our network and help expose this program to the public. What would exposing it accomplish? David leaned forward. The program operates in secrecy because it couldn't survive public scrutiny. If Americans understood that their government was systematically controlling the country's most innovative minds, there would be massive political opposition. But how do you expose a classified program without getting arrested for revealing state secrets? Very carefully, Rachel said. We've been working on a strategy that involves simultaneous disclosure by multiple sources, combined with international media coverage that would make suppression difficult. Rachel pulled up a timeline showing their planned exposure strategy. We're close to being ready. We have documented evidence of the program's existence, testimony from victims, and analysis of its economic and social impacts. What we need is a case that demonstrates the program's overreach so clearly that it can't be dismissed or ignored. Avalon realized they were suggesting that her case could be that demonstration. You want to use my situation as the catalyst for exposing the entire program. Your case is perfect, David said. You're a sympathetic figure, a brilliant student who just wants to pursue her education. You've been threatened with prosecution for activities that should be protected under academic freedom. And you've refused to be intimidated by federal agencies. But if we expose the program using my case, I'll be at the center of a massive political controversy. Yes, Rachel admitted. And the government will do everything possible to discredit you, prosecute you, or worse. But you'll also have the protection that comes from public attention and media coverage. Kendra, who had been quietly listening to the conversation, finally spoke. Avalon, this is a huge decision. They're asking you to risk everything to expose a program that most people don't even know exists. The alternative, David said, is to spend the rest of your life either working for the government against your will or hiding from them. The program doesn't offer retirement plans. Avalon walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, federal agents were searching for her. University administrators were trying to figure out how to handle her situation. And hundreds of other exceptional students were facing similar pressures without even understanding what was happening to them. If I agree to help expose this program, what exactly would I need to do? Rachel pulled up a detailed plan on her computer. We would need you to document your experiences, participate in recorded interviews, and potentially testify before Congress if we can get hearings scheduled. We would also need access to any evidence you have about how the program operates. What about my safety? We would provide security and legal support, but I won't lie to you, there would be significant risks. The government has extensive capabilities for retaliation. Avalon thought about all the students whose lives had been altered by the program, about the innovations that had been suppressed, about the future of technological freedom in America. She thought about her own desire to pursue independent research and her refusal to be controlled by federal agencies. How long would it take to organize this exposure? If you agree to participate, we could be ready to go public within 2 weeks, David said. We already have most of the documentation prepared. Your case would be the final piece of evidence we need. Avalon turned back to face the group. What happens to the program after it's exposed? Ideally, congressional oversight would lead to major reforms or termination of the program. At minimum, public awareness would make it much harder for them to operate secretly. And what happens to all the people who are already trapped in the system? That would depend on the political response, Rachel said. But exposure would at least give them options they don't currently have. Avalon realized that her decision would affect not just her own future, but the futures of thousands of other people who had been caught in the government's talent acquisition system. The scope of the problem was far larger than she had imagined, but so was the potential impact of resistance. "I need some time to think about this," she said finally. "Of course," Rachel replied. "But don't take too long. Every day you remain in hiding, the government's search for you becomes more intensive. And every day the program continues to operate, more students get pulled into the system." As Avalon considered her options, she realized that her simple desire to pursue her education had evolved into a choice about the future of innovation and freedom in America. The stakes were no longer just personal, they were national. Should Avalon risk everything to expose a secret government program that controls America's brightest minds? The decision she makes will determine the fate of thousands of other students. What would you do in her situation? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to see what choice she makes in this impossible situation. Avalon had been at the safe house for 3 days, reviewing documents and preparing her decision about joining the Resistance Network's exposure plan, when everything went wrong. She was sitting at one of the computer workstations, analyzing the evidence that Rachel and David had compiled, when the building's security system began emitting a low, urgent alarm. Rachel burst into the main room from the communications center, her face pale with panic. "We have multiple federal vehicles surrounding the building. They found us." David was already at the window with binoculars. "I count at least 8 vehicles. FBI, ATF, and what looks like a military unit. They're setting up a perimeter." Avalon felt her stomach drop as she realized the implications. How did they find this location? "Someone talked," Rachel said grimly, beginning to destroy hard drives with practiced efficiency. "We have maybe 5 minutes before they breach the building." Kendra, who had been staying at the safe house with Avalon, Rachel's expression grew grim as she checked her secure communications. "Avalon, I'm getting reports that federal agents have surrounded your family's home in Millbrook. Your parents are currently being questioned about your activities." The room spun around Avalon as she realized the full scope of the trap. The government wasn't just targeting her, they were using her family as leverage to force her compliance. "This is my fault," she said, slumping into a chair. "I brought this on them." "No," David said firmly. "This is what the program does to people who resist. They escalate until you have no choice but to surrender." Commander Blackstone's voice came over the megaphone again. "Miss Reeves, your parents are safe, but they're very worried about you. They've been told that you're involved with domestic terrorists and that your life is in danger. They want you to come home." Kendra moved to the window and peered through the blinds. "Avenue, there are news vans arriving. This is becoming a media event." Rachel checked her tablet. "The local news is reporting that federal agents are conducting a counter-terrorism operation targeting a suspected domestic terrorist cell. They're not mentioning the talent recruitment program at all." Avalon realized that the government was framing the situation to justify their actions, while completely concealing the real issue. "They're controlling the narrative to make us look like criminals, which is exactly what they always do," David said. "Anyone who resists the program gets labeled as a terrorist, a foreign agent, or a criminal. The public never learns about the real reason for the arrests." A loud crash came from the building's lower level, followed by the sound of multiple footsteps and shouted commands. The federal agents had breached the building and were beginning their systematic search. "We have maybe 2 minutes before they reach this floor," Rachel said. "Avalon, you have to make a choice right now. Surrender and hope they honor their deal, or try to escape and become a fugitive." Avalon looked around the room at the faces of people who had risked everything to help her understand the truth about the government's program. Rachel, who had sacrificed a promising career to help other students. David, who had spent years documenting governmental overreach. Kendra, who had stood by her despite the danger. If I surrender, what happens to all of you? We'll be arrested and charged with various crimes related to domestic terrorism, Rachel said matter-of-factly. The evidence we've collected will be seized and classified. The resistance network will be severely damaged, and if we try to escape, we'll probably be caught anyway. But there's a small chance some of us might get away with copies of the evidence. The sound of footsteps was getting closer. Avalon could hear agents searching rooms on their floor, systematically working their way toward their location. David finished copying the last of the critical files and began distributing encrypted drives to each person. If we get separated, these contain everything we've learned about the program. The encryption keys are embedded in a steganographic pattern that requires all 4 drives to decode. Avalon took her drive, realizing that she was now carrying evidence that could expose the government's systematic control of America's brightest minds. David, if I don't make it out of this, promise me you'll find a way to get this information to the public. We're not giving up yet, Rachel said, leading them toward a maintenance access panel near the ceiling. The ventilation system is our only chance. As they prepared to climb into the building's ductwork, Avalon's phone rang. The caller ID showed home, her parents' number. Her heart lurched as she realized the psychological pressure the government was applying. Don't answer it, Rachel warned. They're probably forcing your parents to call you, but Avalon was already accepting the call. Her mother's voice came through, strained with worry and fear. Avalon, sweetheart, please tell me you're safe. The FBI agents here say you're involved with dangerous people. They say you could be hurt if you don't come home immediately. Avalon felt tears welling up in her eyes. Mom, I'm okay. But the situation is more complicated than the agents are telling you. Honey, they say you've been accused of computer crimes and that you're hiding with terrorists. This doesn't sound like you at all. In the background, Avalon could hear a male voice coaching her mother on what to say. The realization that federal agents were manipulating her parents filled her with rage. Mom, listen to me carefully. I haven't committed any crimes, and I'm not with terrorists. I'm with people who are trying to expose a government program that violates students' rights. Avalon. Her father's voice came on the line. The agents here have showed us evidence that you've been accessing classified computer systems. They say you could face 20 years in prison unless you cooperate with them. The manipulation was obvious, but Avalon knew her parents were genuinely terrified for her safety. The government was using their love for her as a weapon against both her and them. Dad, the computer systems I accessed were traps designed to identify students like me. The whole thing is a setup to force talented people into government programs. Heavy footsteps stopped outside their door. Agent Torres's voice came through clearly. Miss Reeves, we know you're in there. Open the door, and we can resolve this peacefully. Rachel gestured urgently toward the ventilation access, but Avalon hesitated, still holding the phone. Her parents' voices were pleading with her to surrender, their fear palpable even through the electronic connection. Avalon, Commander Blackstone's voice came through the door. I'm going to make you a one-time offer. Surrender now, and we'll arrange for you to work on civilian applications of your research. You'll have considerable freedom and excellent compensation. Refuse, and you'll be charged with terrorism-related offenses. What about my parents? Avalon called through the door. They'll be released immediately once you cooperate. They're not involved in this situation. David grabbed Avalon's arm. He's lying. Once you surrender, you'll have no leverage to protect anyone. Rachel was already climbing into the ventilation system. Avalon, we have to move now. But Avalon found herself frozen by the impossible choice. Surrender and sacrifice her freedom to protect her parents and friends, or escape and leave them to face the consequences of her resistance. Avalon. Her mother's voice came through the phone again. Please just come home. We can figure everything else out later. The door to their room exploded inward as federal agents breached it with a battering ram. Agent Torres entered first, weapon drawn, followed by 4 other agents in tactical gear. "Nobody move," Torres commanded. "Miss Reeves, step away from your companions and surrender your electronic devices." Avalon looked around the room one last time. Rachel was halfway into the ventilation system, but had stopped when the agents entered. David stood frozen beside a computer workstation, his hands raised. Kendra was pressed against the wall, tears streaming down her face. "Agent Torres," Avalon said, "if I surrender, will you release my friends?" "They're not involved in anything illegal. That depends on what we find when we search this location," Torres replied. "But cooperation will be viewed favorably." Avalon realized that the government had orchestrated this confrontation perfectly. They had isolated her from any support system, threatened her family, and created a situation where resistance seemed to guarantee harm to everyone she cared about. "Miss Reeves." Commander Blackstone entered the room, his expression showing what might have been genuine regret. "You're an extraordinarily talented young woman. Don't throw your life away over ideological principles. Work with us, and you can accomplish things that will benefit millions of people. Under your control and according to your priorities," Avalon replied. "Under the guidance of people who understand the broader implications of advanced technology. Individual genius is meaningless without institutional support and direction." Avalon looked at the encrypted drive in her hand, containing evidence that could expose the systematic suppression of American innovation. Then she looked at her friends, who had risked everything to help her understand the truth. "Commander Blackstone," she said quietly, "I need to know what's really going to happen to me if I cooperate. You'll be debriefed about your capabilities and research. You'll be assigned to projects that match your interests and abilities. You'll be well compensated and given access to resources that no private institution could provide. And I'll never be allowed to leave." "Commander." Blackstone's silence was answer enough. Agent Torres stepped forward. "Miss Reeves, you're under arrest for violations of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, conspiracy to commit domestic terrorism, and possession of classified materials." As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Avalon realized that her choice to resist the government's recruitment program had led exactly where the system was designed to lead, to a situation where surrender was the only option that wouldn't destroy everyone she cared about. But as they led her from the room, she managed to catch Rachel's eye. The brief nod Rachel gave her suggested that the resistance network had one final card to play. The question was whether it would be enough to save not just Avalon, but the thousands of other brilliant minds trapped in the government's web of control. Has Avalon's resistance movement finally been crushed? With her arrest and her family threatened, it seems like the government has won. But the resistance network may have one last desperate plan. What do you think Rachel and David can do now that Avalon is in federal custody? Share your theories in the comments and subscribe to see if there's any hope left for exposing this conspiracy. Avalon sat in a sterile interrogation room at the Federal Detention Center in downtown Sacramento, her hands cuffed to a metal table. For 18 hours she had been questioned by a rotating team of federal agents, each trying a different approach to break her resolve. Agent Torres had been aggressive and threatening. Commander Blackstone had been persuasive and paternalistic. A woman introduced only as Dr. Sarah Hoffman had tried psychological manipulation. None of them had succeeded in getting Avalon to reveal the locations of other resistance safe houses or provide access to the encrypted evidence drives. But she was exhausted, worried about her family, and beginning to wonder if her resistance had accomplished anything beyond putting innocent people in danger. The door opened, and Agent Torres entered with a tablet and a satisfied expression. "Miss Reeves, I have some news that might interest you. Your friends Rachel Kim and David Park were captured this morning, attempting to cross the Canadian border. They're being held on charges of espionage and terrorism." Avalon felt her heart sink. If Rachel and David had been captured, the Resistance Network's final hope of exposing the talent recruitment program was gone. The encrypted drives they were carrying have been turned over to NSA cryptographers, Torres continued. It's only a matter of time before we decrypt them and identify every member of your terrorist network. They're not terrorists, Avalon said wearily. They're people trying to protect students from government overreach. That's an interesting perspective from someone who illegally accessed classified computer systems and conspired with domestic extremists. Torres sat across from her. But I have an offer that might salvage something from this situation. Before Avalon could respond, the interrogation room door burst open. A woman in an expensive suit strode in, followed by two men in similar attire. The woman's bearing suggested someone accustomed to command, and Agent Torres immediately stood at attention. Agent Torres, this interrogation is suspended, the woman announced. I'm Director Janet Colby from the Office of the Inspector General. Miss Reeves, you're coming with us. Torres looked confused and alarmed. Director Colby, this is a federal terrorism investigation. You don't have jurisdiction. Agent Torres, you're mistaken about several things, starting with your authority in this matter. Director Colby pulled out a document that Torres examined with growing alarm. This detention has been conducted without proper oversight, and the charges against Miss Reeves are being dropped pending a full investigation. As the handcuffs were removed from Avalon's wrists, Director Colby turned to her. Miss Reeves, are you injured? Have you been mistreated during your detention? I'm okay, Avalon said cautiously. But I don't understand what's happening. What's happening is that certain federal agencies have seriously overstepped their authority, and Congress is very interested in understanding why. Director Colby gestured toward the door. There are some people outside who are eager to speak with you. As they left the detention center, Avalon was amazed to see a crowd of reporters, cameras, and protesters gathered outside. Signs reading, "Free the students" and "Stop government recruitment" suggested that somehow the story of the talent assessment program had become public. How did all this happen? Avalon asked as they walked toward a waiting car. Your friends Rachel Kim and David Park were not captured at the Canadian border, Director Colby said with a slight smile. That was disinformation designed to demoralize you. In fact, they successfully reached several international news organizations and delivered comprehensive evidence about the National Talent Assessment Program. Avalon felt a surge of hope. The evidence got out? 3 hours ago, The Guardian, Der Spiegel, and The Washington Post simultaneously published detailed exposes of the program. The story has been picked up by news organizations worldwide. Congressional leaders are demanding immediate hearings, and the White House is scrambling to contain the political damage. They reached the car, where Avalon was surprised to see Kendra waiting for her. Her roommate rushed to embrace her. Avenue, I was so scared they were going to make you disappear, Kendra said. But then everything changed this morning when the news broke. As they drove through Sacramento, Avalon could see protesters gathering at federal buildings and university campuses. The scale of public response was beyond anything she had imagined possible. Director Colby, what exactly is your role in all this? Avalon asked. The Office of the Inspector General investigates misconduct within federal agencies. We've been aware of irregularities in the talent assessment program for some time, but we needed documentation and whistleblower testimony to build a case. So you knew about Rachel and David's plan? We've been in contact with the Resistance Network for several months. Your case provided the catalyst we needed to move forward with a full investigation. Avalon realized that her capture hadn't been the end of the resistance. It had been part of a larger strategy. How long have you been planning this? The Inspector General's office has been investigating the program for over a year. But we needed someone with the credibility and documentation to make the case publicly. Your friends provided both. They arrived at a hotel where Avalon was reunited with her parents, who had been flown in from Oregon under federal protection. Her mother's relief was overwhelming, and her father's anger at the government's manipulation was palpable. "Avalon, we had no idea what you were really dealing with," her mother said. "The agents who questioned us made it sound like you were involved with dangerous criminals. That's exactly what they wanted you to think," Director Colby said. "The program depends on isolating targets from their support systems through fear and misinformation." Professor Whitmore appeared in the hotel lobby, looking both relieved and ashamed. "Avalon, I owe you an enormous apology. I had no idea that my report would trigger such a massive response. Professor, you couldn't have known. The system was designed to use well-meaning people like you to identify targets." "That's exactly right," Director Colby said. "The program has been manipulating university faculty for years, using their reports to build databases of exceptional students." A knock on the hotel room door announced the arrival of Rachel and David, both looking exhausted but triumphant. Avalon embraced them both, grateful that they had survived and succeeded in their mission. "Rachel, how did you manage to get the evidence to the media?" "We had backup plans that we never told you about," Rachel explained. "Multiple copies of the evidence were distributed to trusted contacts around the world. When you were arrested, it triggered the release protocols." David pulled out his laptop and showed her the international news coverage. "The story is being covered by every major news organization. The European Union is demanding explanations from the U.S. government. 3. Universities have already announced they're withdrawing from the program. What about all the students who are already trapped in the system?" Avalon asked. Director Colby answered. "Congressional hearings are being scheduled for next week. We expect that public pressure will force major reforms or complete termination of the program. Students who have been coerced into government positions will likely be given opportunities to leave, and the legal charges against me dropped entirely. In fact, the Justice Department is more interested in prosecuting the federal agents who exceeded their authority in your case." Agent Torres, who had seemed so confident just hours earlier, was now facing an investigation for conducting unauthorized surveillance and detention operations. Commander Blackstone had been relieved of duty pending a review of his role in the program. Rachel pulled up social media feeds showing student protests at universities across the country. "Avenue, your case has become a symbol of resistance to government overreach. Students everywhere are demanding transparency about federal recruitment programs on their campuses." Professor Whitmore showed her an email from Dean Patterson. "Thornfield University is conducting a comprehensive review of its relationship with federal agencies. Faculty members who participated in student surveillance are being investigated. What happens now?" Avalon asked. Director Colby consulted her notes. "You'll be asked to testify before Congress about your experiences. Your testimony will help legislators understand how the program operates and why it needs to be reformed or eliminated. And after that? After that, you'll be free to pursue your education and research without government interference. The publicity around your case will make it very difficult for federal agencies to target you again." Avalon looked around the room at the people who had supported her through the most difficult period of her life. Her parents, who had been unwitting victims of government manipulation. Kendra, who had stood by her despite the danger. Professor Whitmore, who had been used by the system but had ultimately helped expose it. Rachel and David, who had risked everything to document and expose the truth. "I want to make sure this doesn't happen to other students," Avalon said. "If I testify before Congress, I want to focus on protecting academic freedom and preventing future abuses. That's exactly what we need," Director Colby said. "Your voice will carry enormous weight because you experienced the program's tactics firsthand." David showed her polling data on his laptop. "Public opinion is overwhelmingly against the program. 78% of Americans think the government shouldn't be able to force students into federal employment. The political momentum is building rapidly, Rachel added. Several senators are calling for criminal investigations of program administrators. Avalon realized that her individual act of resistance had grown into a national movement for protecting intellectual freedom and academic independence. The personal had become political, and the political had the potential to create lasting change. There's something else you should know, Director Colby said. The international scientific community is offering support to American students who want to pursue independent research. Several countries are creating special visa programs for researchers who have been targeted by the U.S. program, so students who want to escape the system will have options. Better options than exile and severed family ties. The international exposure has created diplomatic pressure that will make it harder for the U.S. to retaliate against students who refuse government recruitment. As Avalon prepared for her upcoming congressional testimony, she reflected on how her simple desire to pursue computer science education had led to exposing a systematic threat to intellectual freedom in America. Her refusal to be controlled had not only protected her own independence but had created opportunities for thousands of other students to maintain theirs. The battle wasn't over. Changing entrenched government programs would require sustained political pressure and oversight. But for the first time since Commander Blackstone had appeared in her dormitory lobby, Avalon felt that victory was possible. The truth had been exposed, public opinion was shifting, and the political system was responding. The program that had operated in secrecy for decades was now facing the scrutiny of congressional hearings, media coverage, and international criticism. The truth is finally out. But will Congress actually shut down this secret program? Avalon's testimony could determine the fate of thousands of students, but powerful forces are working to protect the system. What do you think will happen when she faces the politicians who created this program? Share your predictions in the comments and subscribe to see if justice will finally be served in this incredible true story. 2 weeks later, Avalon sat in the witness chair before the House Committee on Oversight and Reform, facing a panel of 36 members of Congress and a gallery packed with reporters, students, and families affected by the National Talent Assessment Program. The hearing room in the Rayburn House Office Building buzzed with anticipation as Chairman Robert Stevens called the session to order. The committee will come to order, Chairman Stevens announced, his voice carrying the weight of constitutional authority. Today we examine allegations of systematic violations of students' civil rights through a classified federal program that has operated without proper congressional oversight for over 2 decades. Avalon adjusted the microphone in front of her, acutely aware that her testimony was being broadcast live on C-SPAN and streamed online to millions of viewers worldwide. Beside her sat Rachel Kim and David Park, who would testify about the Resistance Network's documentation of the program's scope and impact. Ms. Reeves, Chairman Stevens began, please tell this committee, in your own words, how you first became aware that the federal government was monitoring your academic activities. Avalon took a deep breath and began recounting her story, from the moment Commander Blackstone appeared in her dormitory to her arrest at the Resistance safe house. As she spoke, committee members took notes and exchanged glances that suggested the scope of the program was even more disturbing than they had anticipated. Miss Reeves, interrupted Representative Angela Martinez, a former university professor from California. You mentioned that Professor Whitmore was required to report on exceptional student capabilities. Are you saying that faculty members across the country have been unknowingly serving as talent scouts for federal agencies? That's exactly what I'm saying, Representative Martinez. The program has systematically converted university faculty into an intelligence-gathering network, often without their knowledge or consent. Representative Martinez consulted her notes. We have documentation showing that the Department of Education has distributed over $40 million to universities specifically for exceptional student identification and assessment programs. These funds were never disclosed to Congress as intelligence-gathering operations. Ranking Member Thomas Garrett, a former military officer from Texas, leaned forward. Miss Reeves, while these allegations are concerning, don't you think exceptional technological capabilities might legitimately be considered matters of national security? Representative Garrett, the issue isn't whether the government has security interests. The issue is whether those interests justify systematic surveillance of American students and coercive recruitment tactics that violate constitutional rights. But surely you understand that in an era of cyber warfare and technological competition, America needs its best minds working on national defense. Avalon felt her anger building. Representative Garrett, I absolutely believe in contributing to national defense. But I also believe that contribution should be voluntary, not coerced through surveillance, legal threats, and family manipulation. Representative Sarah Chun from Washington State held up a thick folder. Miss Reeves, this committee has obtained internal documents from the National Talent Assessment Program that describe students like you as high-value human assets that must be acquired and controlled to prevent them from falling into adversarial hands. Does this language concern you? It terrifies me. Representative Chun, the document literally describes American citizens as assets to be acquired and controlled. That's the language of slavery, not employment. The gallery erupted in murmurs before Chairman Stevens restored order. Representative Chun continued, the documents also show that the program has spent over $50 million on what they call target acquisition and retention operations. Miss Reeves, do you believe you were the subject of such an operation? Based on my experience, yes. The surveillance, the legal threats, the manipulation of my family, all of that represents significant government resources devoted to forcing my compliance. Representative Garrett tried a different approach. Miss Reeves, what if the government had simply offered you a well-paying job with excellent benefits? Would you have been open to that? If it had been a genuine offer with the freedom to decline and pursue alternatives, absolutely. But that's not what happened. I was presented with ultimatums disguised as opportunities. David Park leaned toward his microphone. Representative Garrett, if I may address your question. The program's internal documents show that genuine voluntary recruitment has a success rate of only 12%. Coercive methods increase the success rate to 87%. That's why they use coercion. Representative Martinez pulled up classified documents on her tablet. Mr. Park, your research indicates that this program has processed over 10,000 individuals since 2001. Can you explain to this committee what processed means in this context? Representative Martinez, it means they were subjected to comprehensive surveillance, background investigation, psychological profiling, and ultimately either recruited into government programs or placed under permanent monitoring. The documents refer to this as talent acquisition and threat mitigation. Chairman Stevens reviewed his notes before asking, Mr. Park, what happened to individuals who refused government recruitment? The outcomes varied. About 15% were allowed to pursue limited civilian careers under constant surveillance. 30% faced legal harassment until they agreed to cooperate. 20% had their career opportunities systematically destroyed through government interference with potential employers. And 35% simply disappeared from public records. The committee room fell silent as the implications sank in. Representative Chun broke the silence. Mr. Park, when you say they disappeared from public records, what exactly do you mean? I mean their social security numbers were deactivated. Their educational transcripts were sealed. Their employment histories were erased. And their families were told they had accepted classified positions that prohibited contact. To the outside world, these people ceased to exist. Representative Garrett looked visibly shaken. Are you telling this committee that the federal government has been systematically erasing American citizens who refuse to cooperate with recruitment programs? Rachel Kim activated her laptop and projected a database onto the committee room screens. Representative Garrett. This database contains documentation of 1,247 individuals who have been subjected to what the program calls deep classification protocols. Their families believe they're working on classified projects, but we have evidence that many of them are being held in federal facilities against their will. The revelation sent shockwaves through the committee room. Chairman Stevens called for order as reporters frantically typed and photographed the projected information. "Miss Kim," Chairman Stevens said, "are you alleging that the federal government is operating secret detention facilities for American citizens?" "I'm providing documented evidence that the National Talent Assessment Program has evolved into a systematic kidnapping operation disguised as national security recruitment." Representative Martinez stood up. "Chairman Stevens, I move that this committee immediately request FBI investigation of these alleged detention facilities and welfare checks on the individuals identified in this database." Seconded, called Representative Chun. The motion carries unanimously. Chairman Stevens announced, "The committee directs the FBI to conduct immediate investigations of the facilities and individuals identified by the witnesses." As the hearing continued, Avalon watched the committee members grapple with evidence that their own government had been systematically violating the constitutional rights of American citizens for over 2 decades. The scope of the program had shocked even the most skeptical representatives. Representative Garrett, who had initially defended the program, now looked devastated. "Miss Reeves, on behalf of Congress and the American people, I want to apologize for what you and thousands of other students have endured. This program represents a fundamental betrayal of American values. Representative Garrett, I appreciate your apology. But what matters now is ensuring this never happens again and freeing the people who are still trapped in the lie system." Chairman Stevens consulted with committee staff before making an announcement that would change everything. Based on the testimony and evidence presented today, this committee is issuing emergency recommendations to the full House. First, immediate termination of the National Talent Assessment Program. Second, criminal investigation of all officials involved in systematic civil rights violations. Third, establishment of a victim compensation fund for affected individuals and families. The gallery erupted in applause. Avalon felt tears of relief and vindication streaming down her face as she realized that her decision to resist had ultimately led to the program's destruction. Furthermore, Chairman Stevens continued, this committee recommends passage of the Academic Freedom Protection Act, which would prohibit federal agencies from conducting surveillance or recruitment operations on university campuses without explicit judicial oversight and voluntary consent from students. As the hearing concluded, Avalon was surrounded by reporters, fellow students, and families of program victims. The story of her resistance had become a symbol of individual courage, defeating institutional oppression. Professor Whitmore appeared in the crowd, his face showing a mixture of pride and regret. Avalon, I wanted you to know that Thornfield University has terminated all federal monitoring programs and established new policies protecting student privacy, Professor. What you did by reporting the security violations ultimately helped expose this entire program. Sometimes the system works, even when it's being abused. Dean Patterson emerged from the crowd with surprising news. Avalon, the University Board of Trustees has voted to offer you a full scholarship for graduate studies, with guaranteed freedom to pursue any research interests you choose. No government oversight, no federal reporting requirements. That's incredibly generous. But I need to think about what I want to do next. Agent Torres appeared unexpectedly, but not in the way Avalon had feared. He was accompanied by federal marshals and wearing handcuffs. Miss Reeves, he said as he was led past her, I want you to know that I was following orders. I never intended for things to go as far as they did. Agent Torres, following orders doesn't excuse violating people's constitutional rights. But I hope you get a fair trial. Commander Blackstone had already been arrested earlier that week on charges including kidnapping, civil rights violations, and conspiracy. Dr. Foster from Meridian Defense Systems was facing congressional investigation for her company's role in the program. As Avalon left the Capitol building with her family and friends, she reflected on the journey that had begun with her simple desire to pursue computer science education. Her resistance to government recruitment had exposed a systematic threat to academic freedom and intellectual independence in America. The battle had been won, but the war for protecting individual liberty against institutional overreach would continue. Avalon knew that her role in that ongoing struggle was just beginning. Rachel approached her on the Capitol steps. Avenue, we're planning to establish a foundation to support students who resist government recruitment programs. Would you consider serving on the board? Absolutely. And I want to make sure we help the people who are still trapped in the system. David showed her his tablet, displaying news coverage from around the world. The European Union has announced a special immigration program for American scientists and researchers who want to escape government control. 3 universities in Canada are offering full scholarships to affected students. Avalon realized that her individual act of defiance had created international pressure that was fundamentally changing how governments could treat their most talented citizens. The personal had become political, and the political had become global. As her family prepared to return to Oregon, Avalon looked back at the Capitol dome, knowing that the legislation passed as a result of her testimony would protect future generations of students from experiencing what she had endured. The National Talent Assessment Program was being dismantled. Hundreds of detained individuals were being released and reunited with their families. Universities were implementing new protections for student privacy and academic freedom. Most importantly, the American people now understood that intellectual freedom was not guaranteed. It had to be actively protected against those who would sacrifice individual liberty for institutional control. Justice has been served, but this is just the beginning of rebuilding academic freedom in America. Avalon's courage exposed a conspiracy that controlled thousands of brilliant minds, but now the real work begins. What do you think should happen to rebuild trust between students and government? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to see the final chapter of this incredible journey. 1 year later, Avalon stood before a packed auditorium at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, delivering the keynote address at the first annual Academic Freedom Conference. The audience included university administrators, faculty members, students, and government officials from around the world, all gathered to discuss protecting intellectual independence in an era of increasing government surveillance. A year ago, Avalon began. I was a 19-year-old computer science student who thought the biggest challenge I faced was passing my algorithms class. Today, I'm here to talk about how one student's refusal to surrender her freedom led to the exposure of a systematic threat to academic liberty that had operated in shadows for over 2 decades. The auditorium was silent as she continued. The National Talent Assessment Program didn't just violate the rights of individual students. It fundamentally altered the relationship between American universities and the federal government. It turned faculty members into unwitting intelligence assets and transformed educational institutions into recruitment centers for government agencies. Dr. Patricia Williams, the new Secretary of Education appointed after the congressional hearings, sat in the front row taking notes. The Academic Freedom Protection Act had passed Congress with overwhelming bipartisan support, but implementation required constant vigilance to ensure government agencies couldn't circumvent the new protections. Today, I want to share what we've learned from dismantling the program and what we must do to ensure this never happens again. Avalon said, activating a presentation that showed statistics from the past year's reforms. The numbers were staggering. The FBI's investigation had located 847 individuals who had been held in secret federal facilities under the guise of classified employment. Congressional hearings had identified 2,341 students who had been coerced into government programs through threats and legal harassment. Universities had terminated monitoring agreements with federal agencies affecting over 15,000 students nationwide. But perhaps the most important statistic, Avalon continued, is this one. In the year since the program's termination, American universities have reported a 340% increase in innovative research projects initiated by undergraduate students. When we freed our brightest minds from government control, creativity flourished. Professor Jonathan Whitmore, now serving as Thornfield University's Director of Student Privacy Protection, approached the podium to introduce the next phase of Avalon's presentation. His role had evolved from unknowing government informant to active defender of student rights. Ms. Reeves will now discuss the international impact of America's decision to protect academic freedom, Professor Whitmore announced. Avalon pulled up a world map showing countries that had implemented similar protections. The exposure of America's talent recruitment program created diplomatic pressure that led to reforms worldwide. The European Union passed the Scientific Independence Charter. Canada created the Researcher Protection Authority. Even countries with traditionally authoritarian governments have been forced to modify their approaches to controlling intellectual talent. Dr. Liu Wei, representing the Chinese Ministry of Education, stood to ask a question. Ms. Reeves, how do you balance academic freedom with legitimate national security interests? Dr. Liu, that's the crucial question every democratic society must answer. The key is transparency and voluntary participation. Government should offer opportunities, not ultimatums. They should inspire service, not coerce compliance. Avalon clicked to her next slide, showing the organizational structure of the Academic Freedom Foundation that she now directed. Our foundation has helped 1,200 researchers transition from coercive government programs to voluntary academic or private sector positions. We've also assisted 340 American scientists who chose to pursue research opportunities abroad rather than work under government surveillance. Rachel Kim, now serving as the Foundation's Director of International Programs, joined Avalon on stage. The international scientific community has responded remarkably to America's decision to protect intellectual freedom. We've seen unprecedented cooperation on research projects that were previously hampered by government restrictions. Rachel and I have also been working with Congress to establish the National Innovation Zones, Avalon continued. These are geographic areas where researchers can pursue advanced technological development with minimal government oversight, similar to how free economic zones operate for trade. Representative Angela Martinez, who had led the congressional investigation, raised her hand. Ms. Reeves, can you update us on the legal proceedings against former program officials? Representative Martinez, the trials concluded last month. Agent Torres received a 5-year sentence for civil rights violations. Commander Blackstone was sentenced to 12 years for kidnapping and conspiracy. Dr. Foster from Meridian Defense Systems received an 8-year sentence and her company paid $500 million in victim compensation. The audience erupted in applause. Justice had been served not just symbolically, but through the legal system that had initially been used to threaten students like Avalon. More importantly, Avalon continued, we've established precedents that will make it very difficult for future administrations to recreate similar programs. The courts have ruled that intellectual capability cannot be treated as a national security asset, subject to government control. David Park, now working as a constitutional law researcher, approached the microphone. The legal framework we've established protects not just students, but all Americans with exceptional capabilities. The precedent extends beyond academia to protect inventors, entrepreneurs, and innovators in all sectors. Avalon moved to her concluding remarks. When I first encountered Commander Blackstone in my dormitory lobby, I had no idea that my decision to resist would lead to this moment. I thought I was just protecting my right to choose my own career path." She paused, looking out at an audience that included many people whose lives had been fundamentally changed by the exposure of the talent recruitment program. But individual acts of resistance have a way of growing into movements for broader change. My refusal to surrender my freedom resonated with thousands of other people who had similar experiences. Our collective resistance became unstoppable. Kendra Walsh, now completing her PhD in psychology while working with the Foundation's victim support programs, stood to address the audience. "I want to speak as someone who witnessed Avalon's transformation from a student trying to avoid attention to a leader fighting for fundamental rights. What I learned is that sometimes protecting one person's freedom requires challenging entire systems of oppression." Avalon nodded to her friend before continuing. "The changes we've achieved go beyond protecting individual students. We've established principles that will guide how democratic societies balance security concerns with intellectual freedom for generations to come." Dr. Sarah Ahmed, representing the United Nations Human Rights Council, approached the microphone. "Ms. Reeves, the UN is considering adopting the Academic Freedom Charter as an international standard. Would you support such an initiative?" "Absolutely, Dr. Ahmed. Intellectual freedom is a human right that transcends national boundaries. No government should be able to control its citizens' minds or coerce their creativity." As the conference moved toward its conclusion, Avalon reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The scared 19-year-old, who had refused to complete a surgery she knew was wrong, had evolved into a 20-year-old leader fighting for the rights of brilliant minds worldwide. "I want to close with a message for students who might be facing similar pressures today," Avalon said. "Your intellectual capabilities are your own. No government, no institution, no authority figure has the right to control how you use your mind. If someone tries to coerce your compliance through threats or manipulation, remember that resistance is not only your right, it's your responsibility to future generations." The standing ovation that followed lasted for several minutes. As Avalon left the stage, she was approached by dozens of students, researchers, and advocates who wanted to share their own stories of resistance and recovery. Later that evening, Avalon sat in her apartment near MIT, where she was completing her PhD in computer science with full academic freedom and no government oversight. Her research focused on quantum encryption techniques that could protect individual privacy from government surveillance, a fitting continuation of her journey from victim to protector. Her phone buzzed with a message from her parents in Oregon. "Avalon, we watched your speech online. We're so proud of the woman you've become and the changes you've created. Love, Mom and Dad." Another message came from Professor Whitmore. "Avalon, enrollment in Thornfield's computer science program has increased 200% since we implemented the new privacy protections. Students want to study at universities that respect their intellectual freedom." Rachel texted from her new position at the University of Toronto. "Ave, the Canadian government just announced they're creating 500 new research fellowships specifically for American scientists who want to work without surveillance. Your impact keeps expanding." As Avalon prepared for bed, she looked at the wall of her apartment, where she had hung framed photographs from key moments in her journey. There was a picture of her congressional testimony, a photo with the other Resistance Network members, and an image from the Academic Freedom Foundation's first board meeting. But the photo that meant the most to her was a simple snapshot of her sitting in her Thornfield dormitory room with Kendra, taken just days before Commander Blackstone's appearance had changed everything. It reminded her that courage often begins with ordinary people making extraordinary choices in impossible situations. Her laptop chimed with an encrypted message from a student at Stanford University. "Miss Reeves, federal agents approached me today about my artificial intelligence research. I remembered your story and refused to cooperate. Thank you for showing us that resistance is possible." Avalon smiled as she typed her response. "Remember that your mind belongs to you. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. And know that you're not alone. There's an entire community of people ready to support your right to intellectual freedom." As she closed her laptop, Avalon realized that her story had become larger than her individual experience. It had become a symbol of what was possible when people refused to accept that freedom was negotiable. The National Talent Assessment Program was gone. Hundreds of wrongfully detained researchers had been freed. New laws protected student privacy and academic independence. International cooperation had replaced coercive recruitment. Most importantly, a new generation of students understood that intellectual freedom wasn't guaranteed. It had to be actively protected by people willing to resist those who would sacrifice individual liberty for institutional control. Avalon's refusal to surrender her freedom had transformed not just her own life, but the entire relationship between government and academia in America. Her story proved that sometimes the most important thing an individual can do is simply refuse to comply with injustice. Future belonged to people who understood that their minds were their own, and who had the courage to defend that truth against any authority that tried to claim otherwise. One student's resistance had become a movement. One movement had changed a nation. And one nation's commitment to intellectual freedom was inspiring the world. This incredible journey from student to freedom fighter shows us that individual courage can change the world. Avalon's refusal to be controlled by the government exposed a conspiracy that enslaved thousands of brilliant minds and fundamentally transformed how America protects intellectual freedom. Her story proves that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply say no to injustice. What injustice in your own life needs someone brave enough to stand up and say no? Share your thoughts in the comments, and remember to subscribe for more inspiring stories of ordinary people who changed the world through extraordinary courage. The fight for freedom never ends, but it always begins with someone willing to take that first brave step. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.